And I try to always be gentle with my audience, So it's definitely not a violent experience to be in our pavilion. And I just like to confront people with the reality of things. So I wouldn't know what's the crime with this.
I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. At the Venice Biennale every 2 years, we expect big things from the artists picked to represent their countries. But I'm not sure anyone can quite prepare themselves for the universe of Florentina Holzinger. After years of becoming a titan in the theater world, Holzinger is now getting one of the most visible slots in the art world, a national pavilion in the Giardini. She's representing her country of Austria this year, for what is surely going to be one of the most talked about pavilions. Known for feminist performances that push the human body, and by extension the viewer, to their absolute limits, Holzinger does not shy away from nudity or sexuality. Flesh hooks, stunt artistry, live tattooing, bodily fluids, and heavy machinery, all of this can be in play, and none of it is ever trying to be polite. The intense physicality of her practice is not for the faint of heart, and it's an endurance test for her performers. Her work tends to divide the room, and that's something that Holzinger seems to be entirely unbothered by. Opening May 9th, her exhibition, called SeaWorld Venice, fills the Austrian pavilion with water and turns it into something of an underwater theme park, as well as a fully functional sewage treatment plant. There's a jet ski driver doing donuts inside the pavilion. A performer stands inside an aquarium for hours at a time while the audience lines up to urinate in the on-site portable toilets. Their fluids are essential to the work as they're cleaned, filtered, and cycled back into the tank. Outside of the pavilion, Holzinger hangs upside down in a giant bronze bell and rings it with her body every few hours. Her performers had pulled the bell out from the bottom of the lagoon during Vernissage Week in an incredible performance of endurance and brought it by boat to hang in front of the pavilion. In short, SeaWorld Venice is about the human body, but it's also about ecology and about Venice itself, a city that's sinking, built on water, and overwhelmed by the waste of mass tourism. I spoke with Holzinger about what went into building her trailblazing project for Venice, about the move from theater and dance into art, and about what it means to make genuinely uncompromising work. Hey, Florentina, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi.
So I thought that we could start with a work that would build a picture of what you do as an artist. And bells have recently taken up an important role in your work, and they also occur in SeaWorld Venice. How did you come up with the idea to create what is basically a human bell, and what does it demand from a performer?
Well, I have to actually work to think back to where really the bell idea originates from, because I guess I had quite a long trajectory with bells somehow. And I recently was thinking back, and I think it all comes back to, of course, Hieronymus Bosch, actually, in a certain way. I don't trust my own memory. My brain is a little bit like an Emmentaler, like the cheese. My memory is flawed in certain ways. But I think it was at the Prado in Madrid where we were looking at the Garden of Earthly Delights, right? And I think I just saw it there, right? The bell with the person inside of it. Maybe it was this, or maybe, I don't know, maybe we just came up with it ourselves. I really don't remember exactly. But I had been commissioned to work on an opera, and we kind of made the decision to work around this piece from Paul Hindemith, which is called Sancta Susanna. So it pretty much has the church topic and at its center. And so it was clear when thinking about the stage and elements for the stage that we wanted to have a bell present, because bell is very important, I guess, for a sacred building. And then I stumbled into a bell foundry in Tyrol, right? That's a place in Austria where they make bells. And family owned, like really with like hundreds years of tradition in bell making. And there I checked out bells because I was curious about it. They had one bell lying around unused in a corner, and I had attraction to this bell. So I asked, can I hang inside of this bell? And they actually made it possible that exactly in that moment there in the bell foundry, they hang the bell. And then I was like, we don't need the clapper. I'm just going to be the clapper myself. And they made me hang inside of that bell, and it was fitting me perfectly. In German, there is an expression, if something fits like a glove. I think that's like the English synonym for it. But in German, you say it fits like angegossen. So it really has the foundry word in it somehow, that something is melted into the right shape. And I had the feeling it fitted me like angegossen, like a glove. And I immediately started banging away in the foundry, and everybody was pretty gobsmacked. And then we took it with us. And, a bell is not an easy object. So it's 2-ton heavy iron thing. So it's heavy to carry it around. And theaters are not so particularly happy. Everybody expects that the ceiling comes down with that bell. And the first thing actually where we wanted to use it was for a music festival in Berlin called Atonal. So it's pretty much club electronic music festival. And there is this fantastic industrial space, which is called Kraftwerk in Berlin. And it made perfect sense that there we hung our bell for the first time. Because I guess rave culture gets perceived as a church-like experience for many people somehow.
Right.
There we experimented with the bell for the first time, and then we took it into our opera, and there it is supposed to do what it also is supposed to do in a church. So ring in the canonical hours in a way. And a bell is such a multifaceted object in terms of what it stands for, also the meaning of it being rung. So, we have the bells that call the community together for a worship or a service, and bells that are used to warn from floods or warn from war or warn from catastrophes. They are used in times of war. They are used in times of peace. They are used to bring in a life, like at a birth, at a wedding, at a funeral. There are so many different special moments that a bell can initiate through its ringing. And especially also in this German context or Austrian context, or I guess worldwide context, if you really research more, the bell is fascinating because, many bells got melted into weapons in times of war. And to a certain degree, also the other way around, right? Many peace bells that we have are made from weapon shells. Or the really famous bell that we have in Vienna, right? It's called Pumarin, and it's hanging in the Stephansdom, and it's huge and heavy. And it was actually made from artillery of Turkish cannons or something like that. So there is also a symbol that has all of these very contradictory things in it. It stands for peace, but it also has something to do with the opposite of that. So it's a fantastic symbol, I thought.
Yeah. And, as we'll come to later in the conversation, it's really a centerpiece of your work in Venice. I think the situation you just described at this foundry in Tirol encapsulates your ethos really well, to go into a space and ask basically, can I do this? Is this possible? Which I want to also talk about later, like pushing the boundaries of maybe what an object can allow you to do or what a structure or an institution can allow you to do. But first, just sticking with the idea of you hanging inside of a bell and ringing yourself around. This is extremely physical, and all of your performances have this extreme physicality to them. So maybe we could start talking also a bit about how you came to dance and how you also arrived at this physicality in your dance practice.
Yeah, so I guess this is pretty important for still the work that I'm doing, that I really come from a dance background and from very physical place somehow, right? Really the body is really the first medium, and then everything else comes after that or in relation to that very strongly. And I happened to stumble over dance, honestly, very accidentally. I don't come from childhood fantasy of wanting to become a ballerina, not at all. Like, I come more from sports, I guess, or athletics or acrobatics. Did a lot of this as a child, but not super ambitious, because it was clear for my parents also, like, this is not something where you will ever make money with if you're not like super high level, which for sure I was not. So that was never an option in my head, to make money with my body, let's say, or as a dancer, which I still very much connected with certain idea of skill and training. But it was just the fact that as a teenager, late teenager already, so more like 16, 17, 18, I was part of, let's say, call it the alternative scene in Vienna, and I had many crazy friends, and they would do all kinds of crazy shit. And there was, of course, also a part of it more like this Ausdrucksstunt stuff somehow, like just expressing yourself really with the body. And in a way that was ironically an eye-opener for me. It's more because, like many people also make fun of that or like look down on that, like that this is what 60-year-old housewives are doing dancing the 5 rhythms or something like that. But I guess this was an experience that I hadn't had before about, okay, how can I express myself, or how can I not only work against my body, which I guess was something I was used to from being a teenager, being very anti-body. Like I really did not feel at home in my own body at all. And I perceived it really very much as this side of struggle somehow. And there in these dance classes, I suddenly perceived my body as something that I can actually work with and use for myself. And also derive pleasure from somehow. So that's why I got stuck with dance. And then I just happened to become part of some theater projects or something like that, where I just also really enjoyed the creative work around it somehow and developing my own material, let's say. And then it was still a long time before I actually managed to come into a dance academy or something, right? Because if you want to be a dancer, you better go to dance school and train very hard and go to the best dance schools, because otherwise there will be no chance for you to succeed in that market. And yeah, I did not manage to get in anywhere. So I really come from that place where I ran from audition to audition, and everybody just told me, no, 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 not enough skill. That body isn't right. La, 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 la. And I mean, yeah, that were terrifying experiences, of course. And then there was one school that I got into, and that was a kind of choreography school in Amsterdam, right? The SNDO. And I guess I hated it for that matter, because they did not really keep the skill as a holy thing, but it was much more really creative in that sense of that from first second you were asked really to define your own notion of what dance means or can be, or who can be a dancer, or even who belongs onto a dance stage. And this is very central questions, I think, that I still ask myself in the work a lot.
Right. And one could say maybe a big breakout moment, although it's hard to sort of pinpoint one, would be, you know, when you became a resident artist at Volksbühne in Berlin, and you did many performances and theater works there. And then from there transitioned slowly but surely to work in this art world context, which, you know, brings us somehow to the Venice Biennale, which is certainly the most prestigious event that an artist could ever present at. How did you find your way from dance to the theater world and then to the art world? Like, does it even surprise you in a way that it happened this way?
I mean, everything and nothing surprises me, to be honest. Because for me, my work has always developed in kind of an organic way. So I really try to go with the flow and take the waves at the right time somehow. So if a wave offers itself to me, then I'm more than happy to take it. And this is a bit how this Venice thing happened. And at the same time, you know, same as in my work, I don't differentiate so much between genres and so on. Like, I think my work, whether it's happened in a dance context or in a theater context or in an opera context, has always been also, I would say, appealing maybe for visual arts world, because I am creating big visual universes somehow. So it's also not that I have to change my work in order to be present at the Biennale. It's just for me a fun new context to create in or to create for. And every new project, I really look at, okay, what is this specific context and what are the expectations that come along with it, and what is the spectatorship of the place like this. And then we make the project and the work taking all of this into consideration. So yeah, I mean, for me, that enables a great organic development for the work, you know, that you encounter new audiences and new spaces and also different means of production and so on, because it changes the work naturally. And the work is based on all this change of places bring also. Yeah, so I enjoyed quite a lot. And I also think we have our right to be in all of these places. So why not?
Absolutely. And I like that you refer to this sort of feedback between these institutions and structures as something that brings something to the work. You've mentioned, you know, the theater world, also the opera world. And I wanted to, you know, ask you about Austria in specific, because this is a country that is relatively small, but has become through Western art history this titan of all of these forms. You know, there's Mozart, Schiele, Klimt, Freud, Rilke, Nietzsche. There's a Vienna Opera Ball, of course, which is kind of like the most elite event of the year there. And I wonder what kind of a burden or freedom comes from this kind of dense and very specific cultural history and how it influenced the artist that you became.
Yeah, That's a good question, of course, because when you grow up in a place, you somehow, it's just very much the norm for you, the things that you're surrounded there.
Like the water.
Exactly. So obviously, I was living in Amsterdam for a really long part of my life, actually. And now, because I'm kind of artist in residence there at the Volksbühne, I'm producing a lot there, and we are part of the repertoire there. So I don't yet pay my rent there, to be honest, but I'm there probably more than I am in Vienna, where I actually pay my rent. And Berlin, oh my God, isn't it the ugliest city on the planet? I don't know. Some people find exactly this very beautiful about it, the trash level. But for me, it's like, oh my God, it's gray and rainy and it's fucking ugly. And then it really hits me when I come to Vienna and there is this Baroque, Renaissance, this art history everywhere present. A lot of people say, yeah, it makes so much sense, the kind of work that you do. But for me, that was quite meaningless because all of this is very normal for me somehow. But then it hits me, of course. Yeah, okay. And I mean, it's similar in Venice. Huh? There is this exuberance of art history that you're surrounded by every day. And of course, it took me some time to also really reflect on this in a way, yeah, okay, all of these buildings were really made to project power of a certain kind, took certain sacrifices to build all of this. Not everybody was a benefactor from the richness displayed there, for sure. So this also always indicates, that conflicts are a big part of something like this. So a complete division between a lower class and the elite that affords this and likes to show this and so on. So it's definitely, I guess, what I do work myself off in the end. And for sure, the artists that you mentioned, who most of them, right, they come from this turn of the century's 1900s. They were very much reflecting on this, okay, what is underneath this glamour and what is underneath this gold and the underlying fabrics of culture to reveal them somehow. Making kind of these invisible things visible, that is a huge aspect, I guess, also in my work. Like the things that are there and are present, but nobody is talking about them. Or maybe they are not supposed to be then there on a stage of the high art, like an opera or something like that. And Nietzsche and Vienna actionism, that's something that more I started to actively deal with after it was brought up by a lot of foreign journalists, I would say, who would be like, oh, you're also one of these crazy Austrians. This has something to do with Vienna actionism. And this was basically when I confronted this for the first time really consciously myself, because I guess I grew up with this. And even for my grandmother generation, it's normal that an artist might use their thesis and exhibits it in a museum. And this can be culture. Yes, I guess I grew up with that notion. But at the same time, Vienna actionism also did not exactly have its heydays at the moment where I grew up, and where, from my perspective of young upcoming female artists, it was like, okay, they were still a dude party, and there were also certain things that were, like even abuse scandals that came up in relation to this. So it was not a heritage to deal with, let's say, in a certain way. But I'm totally back into it now, because I don't know if you know, but I am doing an event at Castle of Prinzendorf, which is the big place of Hermann Nietzsche, where he made all of his orgy and mystery theaters. And this is the first time where I'm really very consciously dealing with that heritage, and where I also developed, for sure, a lot of fascination and respect for the work also. So this Vienna actionism, it obviously is something that originates from post-Second World War, where in a very Austrian manner, suddenly there was a blanket of silence over what is the Austrian involvement in the Second World War and how do we deal with it. So, many people just went on with their jobs. It was not done in that way how it happened in Germany, that there was a lot of dealings with this, but it was more this blanket of silence. And I think Vienna actionism was really like, that's why it's very graphic imagery, because it was really, okay, we need to break this silence in a very radical way somehow. And of course, I can relate to this a lot. And also a lot of course, anti-Catholic imagery in a certain way, shocking people out of their silence about things.
Yeah.
So I think it's nice for me now to also close this circle somehow, and being able to deal with that tradition in art history. And on the other hand, also being allowed to continue the story somehow in this historical place.
Right. You mentioned that, a boomer generation knows about Viennese actionism and they're not maybe afraid of seeing blood thrown around or a carcass of an animal brought onto a stage. And I want to ask you that in relation to bringing your work to Venice, because there it's going to have this wide audience and perhaps maybe the widest that you've ever had. And, of course, there's American culture, which is, let's say, more puritanical when it comes to the body, and you work with always nude performers. Of course, you had this residency in Germany where nakedness, they don't flinch. So I guess I wanted to ask you, how do you think about different audience contexts? And maybe we can come to Venice in that way. The work in Venice will be in front of people who may not understand these references or may not be, quote unquote, equipped for them. Does that excite you or worry you, or do you even care?
I would say I try to be conscious about this, that this is, of course, different than the theater context where people will most likely only end up in a show when they have read something about it or heard something about it, or even they got it recommended. And I mean, it really rarely comes for people as a surprise that we are naked on the stage, because usually they have read something about it. There is, of course, different type of a commitment when you paid for a ticket to see something. I mean, to be honest, like one of my shows is called Stunt, and it has happened that people thought, oh, that's a ballet performance. And then they're like,
oh boy.
But this happens very rarely, So I do take this into consideration for the Venice context. But we have also been doing stuff outside, outside of the theater space. And for me, like the counterpoint to the theater is really if you enter into the public space, and what that means if a work like mine enters this space, because then suddenly different rules exist and different laws exist and so on. And, in a theater, I'm really a friend of the trigger warning. So I grew up with the trigger warning, and I'm friends with the trigger warning because I'm happy that people can decide for themselves what they want to subject themselves to and what not. And at the same time, of course, I'm aware of the limitations of trigger warnings too, or maybe that they are just marketing. I don't care. But of course, in a public space, a trigger warning is difficult because it's just not accessible for everybody. I am aware of this in the Venice context. Still, at the same time, it's not exactly the public space because it's the Giardini. It's still a kind of cultural bubble that develops an interest to go there. But yeah, we have trigger warnings in Venice for our pavilion because it's still also an enclosed space. And in this enclosed space, we can really invent the rules. And we do bring it to people's attention that there is work around nudity. And I try to always be gentle with my audience, So it's definitely not a violent experience to be in our pavilion. And I just like to confront people with the reality of things. So I wouldn't know what's the crime with this. And I also even think therapeutic in a certain way for certain people. And I mean, yeah, of course, I grew up in a Austrian German way how to deal with that body, but also a lot of people have a lot of different, let's call it just problems around the naked body, or especially naked female red body. And yesterday I was building a skate ramp actually for an art space in Hanover. It's part of an art exhibition, but this skate ramp was standing in front of the museum, not in the museum. So we were like, okay, we will initiate it. But of course we initiate it in our style. So we will skate it naked. And of course it was semi-public space. So there are also children outside there and so on. And there was a picture then online where you see that there is also a kid in the background while we are skating this ramp naked. And of course, especially from the US, it was like, oh my God, how can you do that? There are children there. And for me, it's really like, what the fuck? Like, I think this is one of the big problems, that the naked body gets sexualized in a way where you would say it's not possible to normalize the body, and to that degree that it cannot be something that can be shown to kids. I mean, that really is just the opposite of what I stand for and think. Like, we have a right to normalize the naked female red body, and it's unjust to sexualize it at all times, to instill in a kid this consciousness that it's a thing that is forbidden or that is meant only for the private. It's bad. Then you're also supporting the narrative that a naked female red body should only exist in the four walls of their own household, or in pornography, or in another super only commodified way. And that's really against what I stand for with my work. So it is very much about normalizing this. And that's also our mission for Venice. And sorry, especially when being confronted so much with the cultural history with whether a female naked body is overrepresented, and that nobody has a problem with this. So I think Venice is interesting because it is the birthplace of what is called in art history the lying nude female act. Do you say that in English like this?
The reclining nude.
Reclining nude. Okay, that's the right term. And I mean, this was really what put Venice onto the map as a center of art history somehow. So if then 500 years later or 400 years later, people have a problem with the real female body, I think that's then interesting to deal with it.
For sure. So in the Giardini, visitors walk up and they see this bell hanging from a construction crane and a massive sign that says, "I live in your piss," and there's 2 urinals outside. And these are essential to the functioning of this work because inside you have effectively flooded the Austrian pavilion and created this circular waste treatment facility. So visitors, from my understanding, really complete the work. They are a part of this work. Why did it feel important to bring the audience in this way? Because this is sort of a new position for you, as I understand.
Yes, I mean, I would say I come from pretty postmodernistic context. So also in theater, we are very much busy with throwing the ball back to an audience at a certain moment. It is for me important that people are not only passively watching something, but also perceive their own role inside of this dynamic somehow. And even get also the opportunity to act along in a certain way and contribute to the narrative of things somehow. But it's, of course, also about, we all have responsibility to make this thing. Same as in society, we all have a responsibility to carry in this regard. And it's not enough for me to criticize something. We also all need to look ourselves into the mirror somehow and understand what is our own part in this somehow. And so in the pavilion, and especially in this very loaded context of Venice, also something like the Biennale, it's important to give a chance to people to reflect, let's say. And the water, right? It's this mirror for us. So what else to do there than to reflect on things? I call it in a way a sacred building, right? Because I was looking a little bit at the history of this pavilion. So it was made in between the wars, constructed by this architect, Josef Hoffmann. His concept for the pavilion was to create an art temple. That's really how he called this. And there was another guy, famous church architect, also really active in the designing of the pavilion. So it's really constructed like a modern church from the setup and the symmetry and the way how light floods the building. It's really supposed to make art look like relics in a church. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And at the same time, this topic of water was something, of course, that pushed itself to the forefront when we were thinking, me and my team, about, okay, what would be cool to bring to Venice somehow as a proposal? Because water is just the dominating material. There are so many aspects to it. Everybody loves to swim, but it is also that resource that is important for life, but it's also in danger. And of course, all of these aspects in relation to the climate change and so on, they play a very, very big role in Venice. Nobody can ignore this, that the floods are getting more, and what are the consequences of human activity on this city of Venice. It's really a bit like kaleidoscope for consequences of the Anthropocene somehow.
Right.
And at the same time, Venice is so dependent on the tourism, of course. It's really the city where this sector is absolutely dominating everything. There is a lot of tension there because everything that has been done there in order to prevent the city from the floodings just meant building new industry for this, which is then super bad again for the ecosystem of the laguna. So it's a very complex setting. And also us as artists there supporting this system of tourism in a way through the Biennale. We are all even an active part on that, and not only us as artists, but also the people who visit us there. So this was just for me topics to be conscious about. So we are all participating in this circle of things. And I mean, I really, spectacle and entertainment, it's important in my work. I do perceive myself as an entertainer, first and foremost. And so, yeah, it was clear this pavilion for us, it will be a underwater theme park somehow. Because also Venice as such is kind of a theme park, it's a kind of Disneyland for adults. It's an underwater theme park with a little bit special rules, I would say. So yeah, for me, it's underwater theme park. It's kind of a sacred building, so it's a room for contemplation. But it is also a sewage treatment plant. What happens in the pavilion and in our installation is that all the time dirt becomes cleaned and becomes dirt again and becomes cleaned. There is this constant circle of transformation from impure to pure somehow. So those are all concepts, right, that are not only very important in a underwater theme park, I would say, but also in the church. But as we all know, also on a toilet, like these topics of pure and impure, of clean and dirt. So this is very central topics in the pavilion. So in a nutshell, our installation explores a bit this idea of some people are living in the trash of other people and how this life is livable. And definitely to portray this, living in the dirt of others, it is important to get certain donations from our audience. Maybe there is a little bit of an anecdote from myself that also plays into it, that if you know the Giardini, the Austrian pavilion is very much at the end. And usually when people arrive at the Austrian pavilion, they have had hardcore art experience for 2 or 3 hours. So their bladders are filled. I'm sure I was not the only person that used the Austrian pavilion kind of as a public toilet. So behind it is a nice little garden and that really smells like a toilet, So kind of we are using all of that, what is already there
Right.
for our installation.
There's an insider tip here from someone who spent a lot of time in the Giardini. I think something that's really important to your use of water, because it's a motif in your work, you first worked with it in Ophelia's Got Talent back in 2022, is what it can bring to dance as well, right? And you mentioned SeaWorld. I've been to these theme parks, and as a child, it's so exciting. You get to go underneath and then kind of be in the water and see the whales underneath, which is much more interesting than watching them from the surface where you don't really get to see anything but their fin. And I feel like you kind of recreate this feeling of being inside and immersed in the water, except of course it's not sea mammals, it's people. So can you speak a bit about what it means to put dancers into these tanks of water? My understanding, you guys are spending 8 hours a day in these situations.
Yeah, we do. First of all, me and the people that are coming to Venice, which is basically my team of performers who have been part of many, many shows, we love the water. And honestly, this is a time in history where I think I'm not the only one who is like, I would just take a dive. Just tell me to get out when everything is different. Being submerged in the water is a bit like going into flight mode without the flight, if you know what I mean. It's really also a meditative state, I guess, that we are evoking there for ourselves. And I mean, to be honest, for us, we call it the piss tank, literally. The piss tank of where our mammals are living. It's kind of the altar of the pavilion. So it's really the central point, the place of worship in a certain way also, or the place of contemplation, the place of a ritual that takes place there. So this is usually in a church. This is traditionally a place of sacrifice also, I'm really not just obsessed with the Catholic Church, even though it comes up with some really juicy iconographies and rituals and so on. But I'm interested in religion as a whole. And in any religion, this is a central aspect, the sacrifice somehow. And some of them are more violent and other ones are less. But the self-sacrifice, you also have it in Buddhism or Taoist religion. It's the dissolving of the ego in some way. And how to dissolve better than in water. So this is pretty much the practice that we are doing there, dissolving into water. And yeah, how do we prepare for it? Like for everything else that we do in the shows, like training is the key. And it's something that I really enjoy as a maker. I mean, I think half of my projects, they really come from that place to be like, oh, how do I want to treat my body at the moment? Meaning like, how do I want to train or how do I want to transform us in a certain way? Yeah, also for Ophelia, we spent a lot of time in the water and we're actually there practicing to be under the water for as long as possible without any technical aid. Basically practicing to become fish. And this did more and less happen. But in Venice, it's a certain training. And I'm very interested in that because, you know, I don't know what would be the English equivalent for the TÜV. The TÜV is the institution that says, for example, okay, this beam can handle this and this weight. You know, the authority that tells you you can hang a 2-ton church bell from a ceiling or not. But you know, the body, it doesn't have a TÜV. There is nobody that can tell you you can hang this and this amount of weight on the body.
There's no like guideline book on usage.
Exactly. And no technical inspection or something like that. Exactly. In a way, like I would say we could write books about this in a way, because we are doing this a lot, like testing the possibilities of the body. And to a certain degree, we know how much you can hang on the body. We have a lot of experience with these things. Testing, training, a lot of our work goes into ensuring safety for these things and safety scenarios. And we are working a lot with people who come also from stunt industry, so on, to help us with good procedures, because none of us is suicidal and not particularly masochist, I would say. So I really like to be in a good place when I'm pushing certain limits of the body. Let's still call it like that, because for many people, it's not exactly the norm what we do. But I like to do it in a good way. Yeah. So a lot of time for Venice is being spent also on training in this regard.
Right. And it's not just with experts in dance. A lot of your performances incorporate experts from many different fields, including from the circus. What kind of cast have you brought in for your Venice work in particular?
Well, it's a 7-month period. So we have other projects that we are doing. We are touring a lot. So we really are on rotation in a certain way. But it's still for me the notion of we are moving into the pavilion. So it's really me and people that are very integral to the work and to have shaped it actively and created it together with me in this last 20 years. They are all gonna pass by Venice, because for me it's strong that it's rooted in this identity of the work somehow. So obviously there I took really the water affine people, the people who have come the closest to becoming fish. I took them there, but it's all kinds of people, because also it should stand for what the work also stands for, which is a quite crazy mix of people and different ages and everything. And maybe this is good to point out that people who are present in my shows not necessarily come from the art world, or not even from dance or from theater or from opera, but there are also people with random 9-to-5 jobs. People come from the piercing scene, from the body modification scene. People come from, of course, from dance, from theater, from acting, from music, many of them. But people also come from sex work or from pornography. This team has somehow gotten together from project to project. I like to invite new voices to be part of certain conversations. And that's how this team has found together. And by now, this is, even tight-knit circle of friends. And for me, most certainly also a family. So the family is present in that way.
And some of your performers will be a part of these etudes, one of which takes place during Vernissage Week and again towards the closing time in November. These are actions, I suppose you could say, that take place beyond the quote unquote stage, so beyond the pavilion, and they have been a continuous part of your work for some years. Could you speak about the first one? We were talking about bells at the top. I understand that this one is going to incorporate a bell as well in a major way.
Well, I mean, in case I didn't mention this, that we make a bell for Venice together with our foundry. And this bell shall be hung above our entrance to really show that this is a sacred building, basically. And also to call in certain, let's call them canonical hours and certain rituals, maybe even at the pavilion, the flushing of the toilets and so on. So yes, it was clear for me that we would want the work to also expand outside of this pavilion and leave this pavilion space and the Biennale space even, and to come in communication basically with the outside world, with the real world. And I mean, this is nothing new. We are doing next to our theater works in gallery spaces, etc. Also large scale, site specific things outdoor that really kind of thrive on this, that urban world is included in these choreographies, and the choreography of the real world, it is included and plays a role there. So we have been planning also to do, we call it etudes, these works, exercises, because they are not only art, but they are also very technical exercises somehow. And it's a bit in reference to Chopin, who composed a lot of etudes, right? Exercises for technical difficulties on the piano. And I played piano as a child. So I did my etudes and I played them up and down with more and less passion. And he said the etudes are not only technical exercises, but also should be beautiful enough to please the audience in concert. So that's pretty much also what we are doing with our etudes. They are experiments and almost technical experiments and exercises in the outdoors, but still they need to have a certain entertainment value in a way and deal with this notion of spectacle in a quite fucked up way, I guess. They are large-scale musical composition in its essence. Before we can hang up this spell at the pavilion, we will need to retrieve it somewhere. And I guess my fascination working with the water also came from there, that the water is this deep and dark, almost mysterious realm, like you need to dive into it to really find out what is at the bottom of a lake. And a lot of cultural narratives, they can float to the top if you let them do that somehow. And that was a bit the unearthing of these narratives that played a big role in our stage show, Philia's Got Talent. Like, okay, the stories of the sirens and the melusines, let's let them float to the top and to the surface and tell their own stories a little bit. So I guess the aim of our etude in Venice is to unearth certain things from the lagoon. If you're a tourist there, you take a lot of pictures, but you would not really get a chance to look at the bottom of the canals. And one can only imagine what you find at the bottom of the canals, because there is, of course, the leftover and the trash, and there is the shit and everything that you don't really want to see or need to see. So there is a certain importance for us to unearth this matter also in the context of the Biennale. For the opening, we retrieve a bell from the waters and install it in front of our pavilion to initiate it and open it officially.
A powerful procession.
Yes.
Very cool. You mentioned trigger warnings a few minutes ago, and I recently went to a church with a young person to look at some things, and they were so triggered by the image of Jesus on the cross. Like, it was so violent and shocking to this child. And it really made me realize, and I think that I've thought about this in tandem with your work, is there's like a Overton window of what is violence that we will accept and get inoculated to. And then there's things that we do not accept. And I feel like your work really plays with sort of trying to widen this frame, or maybe it's just about making us aware of this frame. So I wanted to talk to you about this idea of the fact that violence and sexualization is truly everywhere. It's in film and advertising. And then, of course, also in Christian iconography, as I mentioned, which you deal with very much in your work and will be dealing with in Venice. Is this about changing our ideas about what's transgressive, or is it about us embracing the transgressive?
I don't know. I guess first we need to define what does it mean, this transgressive. I guess it brings us also to this question that I get asked a lot. Why are you shocking people? Because, the clickbait kind of yellow press, they talk about shock a lot in relation to my work. But for me, this is obviously a term I'm not very busy with. But then I'm thinking, what is this with the shock? I'm actually fine with shocking people because, it has this very negative connotation nowadays to shock, because people are like, you're subjecting your audience to a violent experience. That's not cool. But, for me, the shock is not about the things that people get to see on my stage, because that's very much the life of every person. The shock is very much in that they don't see that kind of stuff in that context. It's very easy in the opera world. It's already like if you are not following the exact Wagner libretto, this is a big shock for people. And they are like, oh my God, this is outrageous. But yeah, what happens with me, and that's, I guess, why also our opera work caused the biggest uproar in the world of media and like caused us really this media shitstorm. That, of course, this is a place that usually is very much framed by that context and is really operating according to certain rules. And if you even shake on these rules a little bit, it's already outrageous. Like in the experimental dance scene, you can go much further. Or, of course, in the underground, you can go as far as you please to a certain extent, I would say.
Right.
So always depends on the context that you're in. For me, it's obviously why I deal with violent imagery or graphic imagery is also because I want to point to a certain structural violence that is inherent in all of our lives. And maybe we are even a part of it, whether as victims or as perpetrators. And it's just important for me to negotiate these topics, even on a high art stage. So if an elder couple who comes to the opera is super shocked by, I don't know, seeing real blood or something like this, or seeing naked bodies, these people also know that structural violence exists. And they also know even that pornography exists. And maybe it's even a part of their life in some way or the other. They are just shocked by seeing it in the context of opera. So if shocking people means shocking them with the reality of things, this is totally fine with me. That's the bottom line. I see it more like shocking people out of their conventions. And if that is then transgressive, then I think this is a very important role of art also. And I'm not shying away from that. And yeah, it can be confrontational for people and so on. But as opposed to the violence that you get overloaded with by social media, and you're doom scrolling, it's very violent, explicit imagery that you see there. And it's very unmediated and even uncontextualized, that there is no way of processing this even. In our shows, this is very much contextualized and very much mediated. And of course, if you just read a headline of like a yellow pressed paper, you don't really get this. But if you come to a show, you must certainly do. And yeah, all you see there is then things that everybody knows anyways, or at least should know.
In that sense, if there's a protest outside of your show, it maybe means that you're doing something right because you're stirring people to some sort of action. I mean, you accept basically the spectrum of reactions that will come.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, honestly speaking, for me as an artist, it's great if the work branches out into the real world in that way, that it becomes almost a part of this somehow, because it's still, I guess, a certain cultural bubble that subjects themselves to art in that way. Yeah, so for me, it's always a reality check, because people are to me like, but what is this about this feminist work? What do you have to complain about? You grew up in Austria in a certain liberal bubble. What is the fight that you really have to fight in this regard? And then it's just very eye-opening and a big, big reality check for how the real world operates, to be confronted with this misogyny on the internet, or that then we immediately have people pro-life, alt-right protesters in front of our theater that prevent people from entering and tell them there are naked women in there. It's the devil's work that we need to diminish somehow, especially, in a world where a lot of regressive tendencies are again in the uprising, with everything moving more towards fascist governments and moving to the right.
Exactly.
Obviously, the first things that have to compromise are basic women rights, or questions in regards to who has the control over reproductive rights and women's bodies. That's just really very much the world that we live in right now. So there is a certain urgency to stand our ground and also inhabit space and bring these topics up.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Florentina, and a huge congratulations on your pavilion in Venice.
Thank you very much.
The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manilow, with contributions from myself, Ben Davis, and Carolyn Goldstein. Thanks for listening.